The Bell V-280 Valor, officially developed by Bell Helicopter in the United States as part of the Future Vertical Lift program and carrying the conceptual designation MV-75 in some contexts, stands as one of the most advanced military tiltrotor aircraft in existence today, and while it was primarily designed for the United States Army, its technological relevance, operational flexibility, and game-changing capabilities make it highly significant when examined from the perspective of South Africa and the broader African continent, where air mobility, long-range operations, peacekeeping missions, and humanitarian relief are critical challenges for the South African National Defence Force (SANDF), and to appreciate why this aircraft matters, one must first understand that it represents the next step in tiltrotor evolution beyond the V-22 Osprey, offering a unique combination of vertical lift, high-speed forward flight, long endurance, and adaptability that can directly address many of the operational limitations faced by African militaries. And although South Africa is not the country funding or developing the Valor, analyzing its role from the South African perspective is not only relevant but essential for understanding how global aviation advancements could influence Africa's defense posture in the coming decades, because the SANDF has historically been tasked with a wide range of responsibilities including border patrol, counterinsurgency, regional stabilization, United Nations peacekeeping deployments, humanitarian assistance during natural disasters, and rapid response operations across vast and often undeveloped terrains. And in these missions, conventional helicopters like the Oryx or Hawk, while effective, face the same limitations of speed, range, and logistical dependency that tiltrotor technology seeks to overcome. And so the V-280 Valor becomes highly relevant as a potential force multiplier, because its ability to take off and land vertically while cruising at airplane-like speeds of over 280 knots with ranges exceeding 500 nautical miles without refueling means that the SANDF, if it were ever to access such technology, would suddenly gain the ability to insert troops, deliver supplies, or conduct medical evacuation across southern Africa with unprecedented efficiency. And when one considers the vastness of African geography, from the deserts of Namibia to the forests of the Congo, from peacekeeping in Mozambique or the Central African Republic to humanitarian missions after floods in KwaZulu-Natal, the importance of speed and distance becomes clear, because in many cases helicopters simply cannot reach the areas fast enough or require multiple refueling stops, but a platform like the Valor would transform the response capability of the SANDF. And to connect this to reality, we must recognize that the Bell V-280 is not imaginary but a flying demonstrator that achieved its first flight in December 2017 and has since demonstrated exceptional agility, speed, and efficiency. And even though its development is American-led, its impact is global, because allies and partners around the world, including those in Africa, often look at such programs to evaluate their future procurement options. And for South Africa, which has traditionally been a leader in African defense innovation with systems like the Hawk attack helicopter, the question is not whether the SANDF can design such an aircraft independently, because the resources for that are limited, but rather whether South Africa could one day partner in programs, acquire such aircraft, or at least adapt operational doctrine to take advantage of similar next-generation rotorcraft when they eventually become available for export. And from this point of view, the Valor is not just an American machine but a window into the future of what African militaries may need to consider as their operational environments grow more complex and demanding, because the continent faces a unique set of challenges where conflicts are often asymmetrical, terrain is vast and difficult, and infrastructure is lacking, requiring air platforms that can leapfrog these limitations, and the V-280 represents exactly that kind of leap, combining the vertical mobility of helicopters with the range and speed of airplanes. And when one situates this analysis in the context of SANDF operations, specific scenarios become clear. For example, during peacekeeping deployments in the Democratic Republic of Congo, South African forces often face logistical hurdles in transporting personnel and supplies across remote areas where airstrips are unavailable and distances are immense. And with a Valor-like aircraft, the SANDF could deploy troops directly from South Africa to forward operating bases in Central Africa in record time, drastically reducing reliance on vulnerable ground convoys. And another example is humanitarian assistance, where South Africa has often deployed its forces to assist during natural disasters in Mozambique or elsewhere in the SADC region. And in those cases, the difference between a helicopter flying at 150 knots and a tiltrotor flying at 280 knots could mean life or death for victims waiting for food, medicine, or evacuation. And yet beyond operational utility, one must also consider the symbolic aspect. The acquisition or even the aspiration towards such advanced aircraft would signal South Africa's intent to remain a leader in African defense and peacekeeping, reinforcing its reputation as a country with both the will and the capacity to project stability across the continent. And while it is true that the cost and complexity of acquiring the V-280 might be prohibitive for the SANDF, the analysis here is not about procurement tomorrow but about understanding how the existence of such a platform could shape South African military planning. Because as the United States transitions its own fleets and possibly offers variants for allied partners, even nations outside NATO may begin to evaluate options, and Africa cannot remain excluded from that conversation. And thus for South Africa, the Bell V-280 Valor is not just a foreign aircraft but a model of the kind of next-generation vertical lift capability that could one day redefine African defense, mobility, and humanitarian assistance in the 21st century. When we examine the technical design of the Bell V-280 Valor from the perspective of what South Africa's defense force would gain if it had access to such an aircraft, we immediately see several revolutionary features that directly address current SANDF limitations, because the Valor's tiltrotor system allows it to take off and land vertically like a helicopter while rotating its proprotors forward in flight to cruise like a turboprop airplane, effectively doubling the speed and range compared to traditional rotary wing aircraft. And for South Africa, this capability would be immensely valuable considering the sheer distances between operational theaters. For example, the journey from Pretoria to Goma in the Democratic Republic of Congo covers over 3,000 kilometers and requires extensive logistical support when using conventional helicopters transported by cargo planes. But with an aircraft such as the V-280, long-range self-deployment would become feasible, allowing South Africa to project forces more rapidly and independently. And beyond speed and range, the design decisions incorporated by Bell Helicopter address many of the criticisms once directed at the earlier V-22 Osprey, because in the Valor only the proprotors tilt, while the engines remain fixed in position, reducing complexity, weight, and maintenance demands, all of which are highly relevant to South Africa where defense budgets are tight and maintenance resources are limited, and the use of composite materials further reduces weight while improving durability, meaning that if South Africa operated such aircraft it would be less dependent on heavy supply chains and more capable of sustaining long deployments in harsh African environments where dust, heat, and rugged terrain can quickly degrade less robust platforms. And the Valor's open architecture avionics would also appeal to the SANDF because South Africa has a history of customizing and adapting systems to local needs, such as integrating indigenous avionics into the Ruabak helicopter or developing unique armored vehicle designs. So a platform that allows software and mission system upgrades without total redesign would fit naturally into the South African tradition of innovation within limited budgets. And if we think about operational roles, the Valor's troop capacity of around 14 fully equipped soldiers with a crew of 4 makes it perfectly suited for the kind of company and platoon-sized deployments the SANDF often conducts in peacekeeping missions, where moving small but effective units quickly across hostile terrain can be decisive. And the cabin can also be adapted for medical evacuation, command and control, or cargo transport, which is particularly significant in Africa where missions can change from combat to humanitarian aid within a matter of hours. And the SANDF, often stretched thin, would benefit greatly from such multi-role flexibility. And when one imagines a peacekeeping scenario in the Central African Republic where South African troops must secure a remote village threatened by armed groups, the Valor could insert a squad directly onto the scene in minutes, then return rapidly to bring supplies, all without requiring nearby runways or extended logistical chains, something that conventional helicopters would struggle with due to their shorter range and slower speed. And in maritime contexts, the Valor would also be highly valuable for South Africa, whose navy struggles with limited platforms to cover its massive coastline and exclusive economic zone. because the ability to launch tiltrotor aircraft from ships or coastal bases to rapidly reach distressed vessels, interdict smugglers, or support anti-piracy missions in the Mozambique Channel would dramatically enhance maritime security, and in this sense the Valor would not only serve as a transport aircraft but also as a key enabler of national sovereignty and regional leadership, and the survivability features of the aircraft, such as crashworthy fuel systems, ballistic-tolerant structures, and potential integration of electronic countermeasures, would be highly relevant in African operational theaters where ground-based threats from small arms and man-portable air defense systems are significant. And while the SANDF has not faced state-on-state wars recently, the increasing proliferation of man-portable missile systems in conflict zones such as Mozambique's Cabo Delgado province demonstrates the need for aircraft that can survive in contested environments, and here the Valor's ability to fly higher and faster than helicopters becomes a critical defensive advantage, and yet the significance of the V-280 for South Africa goes beyond military operations alone. Because in disaster relief scenarios such as the devastating floods that have struck KwaZulu-Natal, an aircraft that can carry supplies directly to cut-off communities without requiring roads or runways and do so at jet-like speed would save countless lives, and in this humanitarian role the Valor would project not just military strength but also national resilience and leadership across southern Africa, reinforcing South Africa's identity as both a regional stabilizer and a humanitarian responder. And while critics may argue that such technology is beyond South Africa's immediate financial reach, the broader point remains that as tiltrotor technology matures and potentially becomes available for export in the future, the SANDF must consider how such platforms could integrate into its doctrine, because failing to anticipate the next generation of vertical lift could leave African forces increasingly outmatched by threats and challenges that demand speed, flexibility, and range, and thus analyzing the V-280 Valor is not merely an academic exercise but a forward-looking assessment of how global military innovation intersects with African realities, and in that sense it is both an opportunity and a challenge for South Africa. An opportunity to imagine how transformative such a capability would be for its defense and peacekeeping missions, and a challenge because it raises questions about affordability, alliances, and long-term defense planning in a country with pressing social and economic needs but also a growing responsibility to contribute to regional stability and humanitarian relief. Part 3, around 1,000 words. Looking deeper into the potential implications of the Bell V-280 Valor for South Africa, it is necessary to situate this aircraft in the context of current SANDF capabilities and limitations, because the force has long relied on platforms such as the Oryx transport helicopter, the Ruavak attack helicopter, and the C-130 Hercules for longer-range airlift, but these systems are either aging or limited in number, and the Oryx, though reliable, is essentially a derivative of the French Puma helicopter developed decades ago, making it significantly slower and less capable in range compared to tiltrotor technology, and as such the SANDF often finds itself constrained in how quickly and how far it can deploy forces without external support, and when South Africa deployed forces to the Central African Republic in 2013 during the crisis in Bangui, the limitations of helicopter-based logistics were stark, because resupply and reinforcement were slow and vulnerable, and this contributed to the challenges faced by South African troops on the ground. So in hindsight one can easily see how an aircraft like the Valor could have changed the dynamic by enabling faster troop rotations, medical evacuation, and supply drops over distances that conventional helicopters would have struggled to cover. And in the modern context of insurgencies in Mozambique's Cabo Delgado province, where South African forces are involved in stabilization efforts alongside regional partners, the distances from South African bases to the conflict zones are vast, and the infrastructure in northern Mozambique is extremely limited, making traditional helicopter operations difficult, but the V-280's ability to operate without runways while cruising at high speeds over long distances would allow rapid reinforcement and resupply, drastically improving the SANDF's ability to stabilize the situation and protect both military personnel and civilians. And another important point to consider is interoperability. because South Africa often operates within multinational coalitions such as the Southern African Development Community (SADC) or United Nations Peacekeeping Forces, and in such contexts having next-generation aircraft like the Valor would not only enhance South Africa's effectiveness but also its prestige and leadership role, because African partners would look to the SANDF as a model of advanced capability, and Western allies would see South Africa as a valuable contributor to global peace operations, and this would strengthen Pretoria's diplomatic influence. But the question always comes back to affordability and procurement strategy, because the Valor represents cutting-edge technology that comes with a high price tag, and South Africa's defense budget has been shrinking rather than growing, which means that direct acquisition of such an aircraft is unlikely in the near term. But this does not diminish the importance of analyzing its relevance, because defense planning is not about immediate purchases but about envisioning long-term capabilities and making strategic choices. And even if South Africa never acquires the V-280 itself, studying its design and potential roles can inform local research and development, inspire incremental upgrades to existing platforms, and guide future procurement when tiltrotor technology becomes more widely available and perhaps more affordable. And historically South Africa has been known for its innovative defense industry, which during the apartheid era and beyond produced world-class systems such as the Ruabak helicopter, the G6 howitzer, and advanced armored vehicles. And while today the industry faces significant challenges, the presence of a tiltrotor like the Valor on the global stage could motivate South African designers to consider hybrid solutions or localized adaptations, keeping the country at least conceptually aligned with global trends. And this matters because Africa as a continent cannot remain perpetually dependent on outdated equipment while the rest of the world moves into next-generation aviation. And as climate change, migration, insurgencies, and geopolitical rivalries intensify, Africa's militaries will need faster, longer range, and more flexible aircraft, and the V-280 is a concrete example of what that future looks like. And in terms of doctrine, the SANDF would need to adapt significantly to integrate a tiltrotor capability, because operations would no longer be bound by the same restrictions as helicopters, opening up new possibilities for rapid deep strikes, long-range reconnaissance, and simultaneous humanitarian aid. And this doctrinal shift would require rethinking not only how forces are deployed but also how they are supported, how bases are structured, and how logistics are managed. And in this sense, studying the Valor is not just about a single aircraft but about reimagining what vertical lift means in the African context. And one cannot ignore the potential for dual-use missions either, because in South Africa civilian agencies such as disaster management, wildfire control, and medical services could also benefit from tiltrotor aircraft, as the country faces regular challenges ranging from floods to wildfires to remote medical emergencies, and having a fleet of fast, long-range vertical lift aircraft would not only strengthen national defense but also directly benefit society. And this highlights the broader truth that platforms like the V-280 Valor are not just tools of war but also instruments of national resilience and humanitarian power. And for South Africa, a country that positions itself as a moral and stabilizing force in Africa, this dual-use potential is especially attractive, because it aligns advanced military capability with humanitarian values and regional leadership. In conclusion, when one analyzes the Bell V-280 Valor MV-75 from a South African perspective, what emerges is a fascinating intersection of cutting-edge American aviation technology and African defense realities, because while the aircraft is a product of the United States Army's Future Vertical Lift program and will primarily serve American needs, its design directly addresses challenges that are just as relevant, if not more so, in Africa, such as vast distances, limited infrastructure, asymmetrical conflicts, and humanitarian crises. And for the SANDF, the Valor represents a vision of what future vertical lift could mean. The ability to insert troops hundreds of miles into remote areas in a fraction of the time it takes today, the ability to respond to natural disasters with unprecedented speed, the ability to patrol borders and coastlines with efficiency that helicopters cannot match, and the ability to project stability across Africa in line with South Africa's regional leadership role. And while the immediate procurement of such aircraft by South Africa is highly unlikely due to cost constraints, the mere existence of the V-280 V-280 compels South African planners, strategists, and defense analysts to think about how to adapt doctrine, plan for the long term, and perhaps seek partnerships that would allow access to next-generation tiltrotor technology in the future. And in this sense, the Valor is not just an American story but a global one, because innovations in military aviation have ripple effects that reach even the most distant corners of the world. And in Africa, where challenges are immense and resources limited, the ability to leapfrog technological generations could mean the difference between stagnation and transformation. And so when South Africans imagine their forces operating not just with helicopters inherited from the 20th century but with tiltrotor aircraft that embody the future of vertical lift, they are not indulging in fantasy but engaging in the necessary foresight that ensures relevance in an uncertain and dangerous century. And ultimately, the Bell V-280 Valor is more than an aircraft. It is a symbol of what is possible when engineering innovation meets strategic necessity. And for South Africa, it is a reminder that the future of defense and humanitarian response will belong to those who can move fastest, reach furthest, and adapt most flexibly. And in that vision, the Valor holds lessons, inspiration, and perhaps one day direct application for the South African National Defense Force and the